All right, young man, you're good to go.
All right, we'll call Franklin Township Planning Commission. We'll call it Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors joint meeting April 7th. We'll call it to order at 7:04. Any public comment?
As Sean Auerbach, I have some comments in three areas, and I think I prefer to make them in the context of the discussion if I could. There, one's related to the survey and its characteristic, and the others.
So John, we usually reserve the initial public comment for items that aren't on the agenda, right?
Well, we could do it any way you want. I just wanted to be able to comment in context at some point. There's some zoning issues that the task force did not engage, and they're going to fall to the planning commission and the board. I'll save them for the last session.
Right.
The survey comments and the security issues related to trails, I'd like to make them in context of when the discussion develops after the PC consent completes their discussion.
Right. Great. Thank you, John.
All right.
Moving on to approval of the minutes from March 3rd meeting.
I went through the minutes. I sent them in and they look okay. So they went out this afternoon. So I don't know if anybody had a chance to read them. But I think they looked all right unless somebody has some comments.
I didn't have any comments myself. Any of the other planning commissioners?
I was fine with them.
I had no comments,
No comment.
so I would make a motion to approve the March 3rd meeting minutes.
I'll second it.
So Chuck made a motion and John seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great. So moving on to the comprehensive plan review. Just wanted to make a few comments before we got going and kind of hopefully just lay the ground, some ground rules in that we want to have a productive meeting tonight. We got a lot to cover. The township advertised this as a joint meeting so that because we do have at least the majority, I believe, of the supervisors here, although this is a planning commission meeting. And so what we want to do is our plan is to get through chapters 4 and 5 of the comprehensive plan draft and review the maps that are associated with those chapters. And this would be a discussion between the planning commission and the alternates. And then once we've reviewed a chapter, turn towards the Board of Supervisors to ask if they have their comments and input. And that the discussion is between planning commissioners, and that we ask the Board of Supervisors to make their comments, and please be respectful that we're not looking for a discussion between supervisors. That opportunity will obviously come when the plan advances from the planning commission to the supervisors. Then after supervisors going to the public, if there's any comment, and then finally coming back to the planning commission for us to make final decisions on that chapter. So hopefully that'll lead to a very productive meeting with everybody having a chance to give their input, but that the discussion tonight is between planning commissioners and alternates.
Thanks, Dr. Hoffman. If I could just say that when 3 or more supervisors are in a meeting, according to the Sunshine Act, it needs to have been advertised as a public meeting. So that's why we're combining with you, because in the past, 3 or more supervisors were on the planning commission meeting. So this is now a supervisors meeting and a planning commission meeting, and I respect your process.
All right, thank you. So going to the comprehensive plan, it was, I'm trying to get to the most recent one for myself, but the plan tonight is that the prior meeting we got up through chapter 3. And the plan is for us to review chapter 4 to start with. I believe we should probably refer to the most recent draft, which is probably, correct me if I'm wrong, final draft with appendices February 25th. Jeff?
I'm bringing up the website now with it. My computer jammed, I apologize.
It'll say for everybody's use, it'll say February 2022 final CP draft for FTPC.
Right.
Right, yep.
Dave, do you want to talk about the maps being discussed in the chapters that we think they should be placed?
Yeah, Janine, feel free to make comment. I mean, when Jeff sent it out, and then Chuck and I had a discussion earlier today that we were going to review, I guess, all maps. We just thought trying to address the maps in the context of the chapters that they refer to seemed to make the most sense to Chuck and I. Did you have a particular reason why we wanted to try to address all the maps tonight?
Jeff and I were trying to strategize a way to get the plan reviewed basically within the contract deadline. And so considering so far just chapters 1, 2, and 3 have been reviewed, the only reason was just to get it, reviewed. I think reviewing them chapter by chapter is a perfectly fine strategy, just within the context of making sure everything keeps moving. So you all can do this within the grant contract deadline.
Great. What I would suggest to the rest of the commissioners is that we stick to 4, address the maps associated with chapter 4, and hopefully, obviously, get chapter 5, address the maps, and then if we had to, go back and address any maps that were associated with the previous chapters. And then that way we could stay on task and hopefully meet our time frame.
This is Donna. Just a comment. We didn't really review chapter 1 at the last PC meeting, and maybe we decide not to do it. But I just want the PC to know that we did chapter 2 is where we focused, where the PC focused their attention. And I think if you remember, Dave, at that time you had a plan to review first, so that took up a bit of time. But I don't remember looking at chapter 1.
Right.
I went over chapter 1. I started with chapter 1 and went over chapter 1. So
the PC didn't talk about it. It's not like we went through it. There was no comments, and we didn't get, because I have a lot of comments on chapter 1, but we can wait till it comes in front of the board. It's also another way to make that work. It's just an FYI.
Yeah, I apologize. I had to step away from the meeting when we started to review the comprehensive plan. Did any of the other 4 commissioners want to make a comment on that?
I was satisfied with our review of chapter 1.
There was a review because I listened to the meeting afterwards, and you went through chapter 1.
Yeah, I was fine with what we had done with chapter 1 when we went through it last time.
So maybe I'm confused. There's chapter 1 where we went by what group is doing what? Because we did not go through who was assigned what responsibilities. That's my recollection of chapter 1. We can deal with it. We can deal with it as a board. It just seems like
chapter 2. What you're talking about is not chapter 1, that's chapter 2.
Okay, thanks, Janine. Good point. Chapter 1's the introduction, right? So, so we didn't go, so we did do chapter 3. We did that very thoroughly, right? But not, I don't remember doing a big discussion about who was assigned what.
All right.
But-
Well, Donna, thanks for bringing it up. Looks like I got enough input from the other planning commissioners that we're gonna start with chapter 4 right now. And like you noted, have opportunity later on to revisit chapters 1 and 2 as it comes before the board.
Makes sense, thanks.
So with chapter 4, resource protection as green, quote, infrastructure, end quote. Anybody want to make comments on the goals and background?
As you
Is
know,
Is Janine going to do what she normally does?
Yeah,
I-
sorry, I wasn't there. So go ahead, Janine, and then I'll get familiar by chapter 5.
Sure. What I did last time around is I just ran through the chapter and let people basically comment section by section, and then took notes for any changes that you all want, to
So
have it right here.
You won't take your notes until it's gone, everyone has reviewed, and then it comes back to the PC, and then we will be interested in doing notes. Okay.
I'll only take notes when the PC tells me it's time to take a note. So
Yep.
yes, I'm not taking just notes of the dialogue. These are the actual official notes of this review process in the errata sheet.
So Janine, is that what we'll review at the board? Is the actual notes you took, or do you modify the document?
Well, I was talking to, remember Bill DeGuffroy attended, I think the last meeting and maybe another meeting. And he and I were chatting, and we were thinking it depends on the amount of notes. But overall, we were both thinking, and tell us what your thoughts are also, that it's probably easier for it to be reviewed at the board if the notes are incorporated back into the document, because then it's just one document and it's not taking one document, another document, and trying to cross-reference them, which could get pretty confusing, particularly when we get to the matrix that I think Donna was referencing. Who does what?
My only problem is I didn't think it was appropriate to attend last meeting. So there were changes made that I might not agree with. So is that something we'll be able to discuss later?
Yeah,
The whole document,
Sorry. What we could
the
do,
entire document is going in front of the board. So whatever conclusions the PC makes,
Right,
we
it's
will
which
all be able to make
version?
adjustments.
Sorry,
The
Dave, it's which
final
version sorry.
Yeah,
It's
the
which
version
version
that
we're talking about? Are we talking about the
If you
version
let me-
after the PC in which it's,
Yes,
so it's difficult for someone who didn't attend that meeting to, to look and see what was changed. Sooner or later, you're gonna have to have two different versions to look at.
I don't agree.
what possibility is, and you all decide how you want us to do it. I'm just here to throw out, possibilities and to answer questions. But a possibility is there's a couple different options. One is it's the PC version plus the errata sheet you're seeing. So it would be, the two documents. The second option is taking the errata sheet comments, merging them into the document, having the document be a different date, a name, so everybody's clear, but then showing through a track change kind of situation. Or what we've done in the task force meetings is I highlighted everything in yellow in the document that was new wording, and then I would just put a strike through old wording. So you can go through quickly.
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
Possibility, or there's the possibility of just a clean document. So those are three options. If you want the strike through version, that's exactly what we did at the task force meetings. Yellow for new wording, and then literally cross out for the wording that was there that was decided not to be used. And then everybody can see what was there versus, what's new wording.
Well, that's great for me. Hopefully no one disagrees. It doesn't sound like it's any extra work and it just gives us the history.
So do you need to be clear, you would take the February 2022 final CP draft and do a strike through and highlight?
Yes.
Okay,
Right. So basically, if this was all new language, I'm just making this up right now. If that's all new language, you would see that. And if you all decided you didn't like this language, then you would see that. So when you review the document, you'll see what was crossed out and then what was the new language.
I think that's good. Is that what we want to send to the Board of Supervisors, the other planning commissioners?
Okay with me.
Either way, it's up to them.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, then we'll just do it that way. Then you can see what, it's, you know, everybody can see what's been done in one document. So starting through the review now, we are in the chapter 4, which is called Resource Protection as Green Infrastructure. And this covers a variety of different resource protection. And the task force felt that it was an important priority to have I guess, to couch the resource protection in the idea that it is another form of infrastructure. And there is a bigger picture reason why resource protection is being done as another form of infrastructure, but as a green, in the case of natural resources, a natural form of infrastructure, in the case of historic resources, preserving the existing landscape. So that's why it's called that. In light of that, the goal that was developed is what you're seeing in blue. So let's just start with that and take comments if there's any comments about that goal. And if there isn't, we will move to the background. If you remember from the last meeting, how each of these chapters are structured is we have background materials, and then after the background forms the basis for the chapter. And basically the background is saying, who cares? Why was this chosen as a priority subject? Why are we even addressing this? And then a little bit of information about, to speak to that. Then we move right into recommendations, which are the higher level. We'll call them the 10,000 foot level. And then we move right into action items and the action steps, which really gets down into the weeds about the 1,000 foot level and then how you're going to make those recommendations happen. So with that said, in the background, as I said, why is this a priority area and what is it? Then there's a section on community input, and this goes through the survey input. It also goes through other types of input. If you remember, again, as a refresher, there was an online community survey done. That community survey was advertised on the township website, on the township Facebook. The township also went to the measure of creating postcards and mailing those postcards out, which advertised the community survey as well as the community workshop that happened in September 2020. And then the township also created actual physical signs to put in the ground at key areas in the township so that people would see that there were opportunities for community input. So what you're seeing here is a combination of the survey input, the task force input, the community workshop input, and then there was also other opportunities for input. The task force had chosen basically project groups of folks that should be interviewed that were considered stakeholders. And so we conducted interviews with those selected people based on subject area, and their input's been folded in here also. And then if you remember January of 2021, there was another meeting, a community meeting, where information about goals, et cetera, was put forth for input about that. So what you're seeing here is a summary of all of that. And again, I want to emphasize the word summary, because the point of this chapter in a priority planning document, which is what the township has here is to really get to what the recommendations are and what the actions are. So does anybody have any questions or any feedback about this particular section on why community input?
It's John Gontars. I sent out an email earlier today, and I went into the history of open space. I've been here, since well before 2003. And in 2003 is when we had the first open space funding initiative, and that the community agreed with that. Then in 2011, we had another open space vote, in which case the community in general, or actually in majority, kind of put increased open spending as not a priority. There was actually a vote against it. And if you want, I can bring up the slides that I put up before. But the results are that when you look at the community input that's in this document, it really only represents about 10% of the maybe 13% of the community. And when you look at the amount of that 13% who are interested in open space, it represents probably less than 10% of the community. So in a lot of ways, what we have here is a minority view of the importance of open space. Now, I personally am all for open space as long as we stay within the open space funding budget. So do you want me to share that information with you at this point, or how do you want to do that? Because I've sent it out to everybody, and everybody should be aware of it. Are there any thoughts or comments on it?
I have a thought, but did you want to share? Does anybody else want to have him share at this point?
I'll go after you, Chuck.
Pardon?
Well, sorry, Nancy, we're just gonna
Oh, I'm
keep
not
it-
allowed to. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chuck.
So, John, I agree with what you wrote. And I think the key here is that this particular, I don't think it's that the 10% is out of skew. I think it's that there was no money actually associated with the questioning.
Oh, I agree.
So the questions were, would you like?
Right.
And by the way, you don't have to pay for it.
Right.
And in, what'd you say, 07? There was money involved. That was actually, oh, and by the way, you have to pay for it. So I think that's really the big, I don't know that it's a inaccurate survey. I just think it's just the difference between one was for free and the other one is not.
Well, I guess the thing that bothers me the most is that right now we're overspending the open space budget, probably to the tune of around $200,000 a year. I don't have a hard number for that thing, but I know what we're paying interest on a monthly basis. And if one of the supervisors can pipe up with what that is, I think it's over $20,000 a month. And I believe there's a principal payment in the order of about $100,000 in December. So when you add that up, that's $200,000 to $250,000, which is being drawn from the general funds beyond what was agreed to by the community for an open space funding.
Right.
And
So, sorry, John, I didn't know. Go ahead if you want to finish.
no, go ahead. But that's the issue.
And it's a legitimate issue. What I would ask is how, right now we're talking about the why with community input, and whether we should be discussing the finances, very important, but trying to keep the discussion focused on, right now we're looking at the background, why community input. And if the information from what you shared with us, John, given numbers and response to that survey, is that what we want to put more into this, or is it referenced somewhere else in the comprehensive plan?
I think we
This
could
section
do.
reference back to.
I think what we ought to do is when it says community input, we ought to reference in there that the percentage of the community that inputted into this. So in other words, I think if you have, let's say 4,000 members of the community, and we had 515 respondents, we're talking about 13 or 14% of the community responded to the questionnaire. So
We have
might
that
be-
in the appendix. We already have that covered in the appendix.
No, but should that be included? But it may be in the appendix, but why isn't it up here in the community input? Saying that, when we applied this, about 13% of the community responded. And of that 13%, this is the number of people who want this. Because that way it's all put in the same into one, it's framed in one context. It'd be different if there was 70% of 4,000 people, but it's not 70% of 4,000 people. It's 70% of 515 people.
Yeah, but so, I mean, that is what happens when you vote. I mean.
Nobody's arguing about that.
Okay.
But I'm just saying,
then-
let's just put this in perspective, that this is the results of 515 answers to our questionnaire out of X number of residents.
I think we should add, my personal opinion is we should add some of the information that you provided that it's accurate to, to community input. We could simply add another paragraph that talks about previous community input.
I'm flexible. I'd just like to get the story straight because it shows up here in community input and it shows up a little bit later in another paragraph. I don't remember where it is. Yeah, open space and parklands. If you go to that one, that's on page, it's 4.3, the top of the page. Because it relates there too, because I think that's not given the full story. It's saying here the community has supported open space preservation since 2003, when a referendum was passed to create dedicated open space protection fund. But we should put in there also that in 2011, the community voted against additional funding for the open space initiative. That would be an appropriate place to put that, I think. Do you follow me?
I'm trying to get, so open space preservation 4.3, John?
Yeah, this is at, it's just below 4.2, the first paragraph after 4.2.
Oh, okay.
It says here, the community has supported open space preservation since 2003, when a referendum was passed to create a dedicated open space protection fund. That's true. But it doesn't say anything about that position changing in 2011, when in 2 votes of the township, they voted against expanding the spending for open space funding.
Can we move to that page?
So are we okay with the other pages then, or are we going to come back to this?
We have to come back. I
We're
just,
gonna come
I'm not
back.
yeah, I'm trying to stay with what you're doing instead of referencing my own. I could reference my own, but
I think you've gone too far.
Well, you're
There it
stuck.
is, there it is, there it is.
This is what you're referencing, I
Yes,
think.
yes. See, the message it gives there is really an incomplete message. It basically says that since 2003, that's been the position, but it doesn't mention that in 2011, the community in a voting process voted 800 and some odd against additional open space spending versus 500 that voted for it. And that shows up in the graph that I provided to everybody. And those are
Right,
hard
so
numbers.
So I understand why we jumped ahead to understand the reference. And is everybody okay that when we get to that, we acknowledge that, we want to pay attention to 2011, at least as a planning commission, and get back to the section on why and community input.
I'm good with that.
Okay,
But you had somebody to ask if there are any other place where it's mentioned.
Right.
Those are the two places.
yep. What as far as any other comments other than John and Chuck on the why? I mean, I personally would like a better clarification of what the 70% is and what the 34% is and the 66%. What I understand, it's a combination of the survey, the workshops, and others' input. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, we explained this in the first chapter. How, remember I said this is the township signed up for something called an implementable comp plan. And in order to not have the comp plan be hundreds of pages, the way these comp plans are structured is they don't keep repeating the same information over and over again. So chapter 1 says what the community input is. Then as you come to the other chapters, you read the community input. There's not an explanation in each chapter about what the community input is again. That's why you're seeing it structured, as it is, where
Right.
we're looking for somebody to look at the appendix to see how many total surveys were done, and then what more information about the individual answers to each survey question. We're not trying to regurgitate every aspect and every part of the plan, because unfortunately, when plans do that, you end up with a much longer plan than you have. I think we have around 100 pages in this plan. So it's still a document that's of a size that's usable to people. If you start doing that, then we end up with a much longer situation. So by contract, that's just how that's how the plan was structured by contract. So I just want to let everybody know that. It's
So
not, things can't be.
Combining what you shared with us and what I heard about the previous meeting's review, I heard most of the planning commissioner members say they were satisfied with chapter 1.
Yes.
So are we still satisfied with chapter 1, knowing that we have to reference it here? I'm not looking to go back to chapter 1, but I did hear that we were happy with chapter 1 and that the community input is more detailed in chapter 1 than in this 3 paragraphs.
I'm good.
I would take
Dave?
the word strong out myself. I would say there's community support, but I can't see it as being strong if it represents only 10% of the community.
So, Dave,
Yes,
so I would point out that if you are going to do this, you have to do this to every Y that's associated with every chapter that has one, and modify them all equally.
if we're,
So you have to back up to agricultural retention, for example. And you would have any modifications that you're doing here in terms of percentages have to be done there.
Correct.
And subsequently, with any decision, any other community input section, they would have to be similarly modified. So any arguments made here need to be transposed to every chapter where they pertain.
If we took the word strong out, would that,
I'm good with that too.
I would
I'm good with taking it
suggest
wrong.
you're going to have to take it out elsewhere or start playing favorites. I would point out that there's the problem you're going to run into is agricultural tension begins. There is strong community support for the continued preservation of Franklin Township's rural character. This is based on a similar survey, and the percentages here aren't any different. They're not significantly different for some of these things.
do you have a preference, Paul?
I think you just have to be even-handed, that's all.
So I think in light of the fact that we're a little concerned about the numbers, I'm not concerned about the numbers, but there is concern for the numbers. The term strong is maybe too much. And I would say that we should take it out of 3 also.
Yeah, your other option is to say there's strong community support in the survey conducted for this comp plan, or among the respondents for this comp plan, which is your other way to qualify it. But either way, I think you have to be even-handed. That's all I'm saying.
So let's get somewhere as far as the 5 votes. Do we want to look at scratch and strong?
I'd vote for that.
I'd vote for that.
Yes, vote for that.
I'm
Okay.
fine with that.
While we're looking at that, what about robust?
Yeah, I didn't like that one either.
I mean, I don't think we lose much by saying based on community input or based on community support, with taking out the 2 descriptives. How about the rest of the planning commission?
Now you're talking me back into leaving support in or strong in.
Yeah, really? You like robust?
That much.
Yeah, Dave, could I just ask a quick question for matter of procedure? Is there going to be any time for public comment as we go through the chapters, or we have to wait to the very end of the meeting?
At the end of the chapter.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Paul. All right, if we don't have consensus, we can separate it. If I heard mostly to remove strong.
But I took it back. I take it back. When I read it, there is community support that just doesn't seem to have any statement at all.
All right. I'm going to say we leave them in, strong and robust. Is there any 3 people opposing that? All right, let's move on.
Okay, let me delete this. Okay, so moving on to what the context, I'm gonna smush that together so you guys can see more on the screen. So what context, this starts to give the existing conditions, but from a county perspective, which is the first paragraph, and it's the same in every chapter. And then we look at existing conditions in an overview in the regional perspective. When we move on to the next section, that's when we look into Franklin's existing conditions. So context is the same for all of them, county then region. Does anybody have any comments for the county or the regional context?
I'm okay with it.
I have no comment.
So moving into Franklin's existing conditions, this is now where we start to get more into the weeds with you all, and how this chapter, what the existing situation is for the chapter, which the recommendations will be based. And we divide this section into biotic and water resources, then into open space and parklands, and then into historic resources before we move into recommendations. So let's just start to make it easy. Let's just look at the first part, which is the biotic and the water resources. And if anybody has any comments about the existing conditions for the biotic and the water resources. It's a really quick overview of what is what.
I mean, you really can't argue with those statements, I don't think.
Right. I think
It's like
keep
following
moving.
that one. Yeah.
Okay, so open space and parklands is the next set of existing conditions. Does anybody have any comments?
Yeah, the comment I like to put in there is that after the first sentence, to put in 2011, the community voted against additional open space spending. But there still is an interest in open space. How do you want it, something of that order? There's two issues. There's a fiscal issue and there's a green issue.
Yeah.
The green perspective, I don't think there's a lot of disagreement. It's a question really is the fiscal side of it. And I think the township spoke pretty strongly in 2011 that from a fiscal perspective, they felt that there was enough spending and they didn't want to spend any more. And there's been no vote since that point about that. The questionnaire, that sure as heck wasn't a vote. That was just an opinion. With no
I totally
consequence.
agree. It should definitely be in there in my mind.
Any other from the alternates or planning commission? I think it needs to be referenced. Is it best in that paragraph?
Well, that's kind of a historical paragraph. That's why I thought that would be good.
Right.
Because it doesn't, you're talking about adding a sentence and a half maybe to it.
Are there other chapters in the comp plan where you're going to include 10-year-old information?
Well, here we're including 20-year-old information. 203 is 20-year-old information.
Right.
I'm updating that. Pardon?
Because you should keep that in the back of your mind also, as you're going through this. So you
Well, I
all,
agree with you, but if we're using 20-year-old data that's been superseded by 10-year-old data, I think it's worthwhile including it.
Yeah, I mean, if we go back in history, you shouldn't skip over more recent history. I'm hearing three of us are saying that we should include reference to the, was it 2011?
2011.
I think it's not
Referendum.
a bad idea to include it.
All right, so we'll make a note that we want to reference that.
and where's the material you're actually referencing? Add to this, because I'm unclear about that. I know we've talked about words but is there actually a write-up that somebody's going to provide that you all agree to those words?
I put something in the document I sent out. I could rewrite that and send it out in a couple of days. It would be a sentence and a half long, probably.
Okay, I just don't know I can add, say, add this information, but obviously you all need to agree to what the information looks like. So
I'll put it together. I'll put it together and put it through the planning commission. And if we all agree, we'll send it over to you. Does that sound fair, Dave?
We have the next meeting to approve it. I mean, I think there's enough information in what you provided to everybody earlier today, John. But if we need to actually write that sentence, the planning commission will write it.
Okay.
I mean, the information's been shared.
So I'm just going to make a general note until, you have more specific information.
John, you're referring to a vote?
Yeah, it's on the document I sent. There was a vote in 2011.
Yeah.
On the chart, there are two bars. One is the vote for additional spending, and one was the vote against. And I don't have the numbers offhand, but it was like 840 were against additional spending, and 570 were for additional spending.
What's that called? A referendum?
No, that was actually a, was that a referendum? It was a vote for spending additional money for the open space fund, and it was rejected by the township in 2 votes. It was put on the primary and it was rejected, then it was put on in the regular election, and it was rejected by a larger majority. So there actually were 2 votes because I think the township was looking to spend or to float another $5 million bond for additional open space spending.
Right.
And the township voted against that.
Right. And we just want to reference that. Makes perfect sense to me.
All right, let's keep moving.
Mark, if I can just, I'm sorry, Dave, if I can just make one comment, I would have,
Yeah.
I would have Jeff pull the original referendum information so that you have a reference sheet for this. That's all.
That's a good
Something
idea.
to write from.
Jeff, would you be able to do that over the next week or 2?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments about that?
No.
So then moving on to historic resources. This is the existing conditions for them. Does anybody have any comments about this material?
Oh, now's your big chance.
I'm
Here.
sorry, I didn't hear. Did she say it's time for public?
No.
No.
Sorry, the same Paul Agassi.
Other poll. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
So, basically, I don't have any particular argument with this, although I don't quite understand the use of the word withstanding in that first sentence.
Okay. But what are you looking for in?
I guess I wasn't clear on exactly what was meant.
Basically, it's continuing.
Okay. Then perhaps something more like the preservation of Franklin Township's rural character is due in part. Is that what? I'm just a little, I find the use of the word withstanding, at least in terms of the way I habitually use it, to be a little obscure here.
Okay, so tell me how you wanted to.
Well, that's what I'm sort of asking you. I just said, the preservation of Franklin Township's rural character is in thanks in part to. Do you understand what I'm saying, Janine?
Could the word present mean the
No.
same thing?
Oh, well, okay. You mean something like Franklin Township's rural character survives thanks in part to? Is that what you're saying, Chuck?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what it was saying is withstanding. You know,
Yeah.
it's continuing, it's withstanding, it's ongoing, it's. So if you want to choose the word that you all like better, then I can just. I don't know what word to tell you because, you know, the word that was chosen, that I chose was withstanding. So if that's not a good
Right.
word, it's fine, but I don't know what to, you know, tell you is the right word then.
No, I'm just, as I said, the use of this word in this way is not something, it is just not how I habitually use the word, which is why I found it a little confusing. And so rightly or wrongly, I'm making the assumption that someone else might, like me, find it a little confusing.
Okay, that's okay.
So I just, yeah, I don't know. I find this.
It'd be just simply Franklin Township's royal character is due in part to the retention of historical structures throughout the township.
That's better than what it says, and I understood it to be the same.
How about if I'm
Continuing, or it continues, thanks in part. Like the rural, basically the historic resources contribute to this rural character. So.
right.
You know, the rural character, it's actually, it's part of the rural character, and it continues is what it's meant to get at.
Right.
What's wrong with what Dave just said? Is due in part.
I
Well,
like Dr.
no.
Hoffman's. No.
No, I mean, I understand what Janine is saying, and Dave is actually shutting down part of the meeting here.
Shutting down the meeting, it's saying that it continues because of it. It's not just due. It's actually the continuing, the legacy, ongoing, withstanding the test of time is basically what is
Franklin Township's royal character continues in part due to the retention of, or, you know, I mean, come on, guys, let's try to put it together.
Continue.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be difficult, Dave. I'm just trying to find wording that I think meets both ways. How about what you just last said, Janine? Something similar has withstood.
Why don't we just say continues?
All right, fine. Yeah, I just find withstanding obscure. That's all.
Continues thanks in part. Is that
No, just in part.
okay? Everybody good with that?
Sure.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, any other changes to this? Any paragraph here? And if not, then we will move into recommendations and actions for this chapter. So the first recommendation is to protect surface and groundwater resources. Then there's a write-up on why to do this. And then we move into these action items, which start with 4-1.1. And the action, the how is the action item. And then the bullet points, if you remember last time, are the steps or some additional information under the action item. So we'll get back to looking at the recommendation itself, why do this, and then the first action item. And if you could let me know if you have any changes to any of this, that would be great.
Just to be clear, what are you looking for comment through 4.1 all the way?
Everything you're seeing on the screen right now. The recommendation, why do this, and 4.1.1.
Okay.
Does anybody have any comment about the recommendation, the why do this, or the first action, which is 4-1.1? And if not, we can move on to the next action. And the next action is encourage private land stewardship actions designed to minimize negative impacts on surface water. Does anybody have any comments on the action itself or any of the steps or background information that would get to implementing the action? And I don't hear anything, so I'm going to move on to consider restoration demonstration projects on township properties. And then here is the step, the information behind that. Does anybody have anything on that?
I'm okay with that.
So the next recommendation then is protect other natural resources. It was felt that water resources should be called out on their own, and that's why they're the first recommendation, independent of other natural resources. Now we lump together the rest of the natural resources. And then there's a paragraph on why do this. Does anybody have any comments on either the recommendation or the why we're doing this recommendation paragraph? And if not, does somebody have a comment? Okay. Moving on then to the next action. For protecting natural resources, does anybody have a comment on this action or the action items under it?
I think these are all okay. These are things that we've done or wanted to do over the years. I don't see a problem there.
Okay. Promote public-private partnerships. Is everybody okay with this action and the recommendation or the action items under it? And if so, then we will move on to examining resource protection standards. And then the ways that that will be done in these bullet points. Does anybody have anything on that, or can I move on?
Sounds like we're good.
I think we're okay.
The next recommendation for this chapter is open space preservation. Again, here's the recommendation. All this in blue. Here's the why do this. And then the first action item under the recommendation, under the how, is duties of the pro board. And I'll scroll down in a second so you can see the rest of those. But for the recommendation itself, or the why do this, does anybody have any comments on that? And then under the first action, the how, the pro board duties. Does anybody have any comments on the action item or the steps under the action item?
The second bullet point, are we preserving the most vulnerable? Or the most vulnerable?
Okay, there's a spelling mistake. So I will. This is on page 7, I think. 4-7. X typo. Okay, thank you. Then under the next action item, 4-32, and the steps under it, does anybody have any comments?
Didn't we discuss bullet point 3 last month and decide that that wasn't likely? There wasn't a lot of interest in that. And Dave, didn't you have some comments on that?
I believe we did talk about that.
Pardon?
I believe we did talk about that there are enough other land trusts around that we didn't necessarily need to recreate the wheel and do our own.
That's what I thought. I think we deleted it the last in section 3. It was seen that we'd want to delete it in section 4.
If you didn't delete it last month, I would be in favor of deleting it this month here. There's, just like Mark said, there's already
plenty
entities that can do the job, and why duplicate?
Yeah. Yep.
And that's
spend the
what we
money for
said.
administration.
And that's what we said last month, same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, and then consider how to leverage funding. Does anybody have anything under this?
Well, this gets into the issue of fiscal responsibility in the vote in 2011. So I don't know how you accommodate that when we're already over budget.
Well, this is leveraging additional funding or other funding, I think is what they were trying to get at. So,
I agree with that. It's just that currently we're underfunding and we're dipping into the township's general fund in order to pay for open space. And I'm not sure what the impact of that is on abilities to maintain what we currently have for infrastructure. So I would raise that same question. We're talking about more money potentially. And the last vote in 2011 really wasn't in favor of that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep into context that the comprehensive plan is a roadmap for the next 10 years. And that we can't necessarily anticipate that there wouldn't be opportunities that we're not aware of right now going forward. In the same sense, I don't want this worded as, and obviously it doesn't, I don't think, compel us to spend more money or to incur more debt. But somehow I'd like to keep it that if the opportunity arises, that we're going to try to find it.
I would mention in the context of this one that at the last supervisors meeting, the supervisors voted to create an open space reserve fund or something like that, if my memory serves me correctly, which would strike me as something that actually does fall under this, if not appear to be almost a response to this in some ways. If I recall correctly, I think the figure may have been 20,000 a year as a proposed contribution. Whether that will be maintained going forward, I don't know, and I can't remember all the details of the discussion.
yeah, I think we did discuss, there was a name of it, and I forget what it was in the ag chapter. Somebody mentioned the land conservation fund, or there was.
No, this is
or is that
something different. I believe that's something different. This was an action the supervisors took, and perhaps the supervisors can talk about that when they're
Right,
talking.
if we're allowed to speak, we can tell you. So.
Yeah, for clarification, please speak. Yeah.
So we did create an open space reserve fund at the last township meeting, and Paul, you're right on that. We agreed that 20,000 would be where we would, that's our goal for a yearly contribution.
I think this wording is good. Consider is the first word. So it's consider, and leveraging funding is also a good word. I think to simply strike it would be silly.
I'm good with the fact that it's consider.
Should we keep moving on then, or are there any other comments?
Move on.
Okay. The next action, develop prioritization for remaining tracks. Does anybody have any comments on that? If not, the next one is, we move on to historic resources, is addressing land stewardship and maintenance. Does anybody have any comments on that one?
I think in this, under why do this, in the first sentence, that should be Franklin Township contains.
Okay, so you're moving on to historic now.
Isn't that what you just said, or did I miss something?
Well, addressing land stewardship, I was.
Oh, you're sorry.
Comments
Yeah,
on this.
I got lost. Yeah.
And if no one does, let's move on to historic resources. So this is your recommendation for historic and scenic resources. And then this is your background, why you're doing this. And what was your comment, Paul?
Under why do this, the third word should be contains.
Okay, thank you. I'll just fix contain to contains. And then the first action item is consider ways that heritage interpretation can be incorporated into agritourism, recreational destination, etc. Does anybody have any comments about this action item or the bullet points under it?
Keep moving.
About the Historical Commission, any comments about this or the action items under it? Applying to become a certified local government program. Maintaining an updated historic resource atlas. And then protecting scenic resources from intrusions. And if nothing on this, then remember at the end of every chapter, there's a paragraph on how this whole chapter relates back to the township vision. Does anybody have any questions on that? And there's a lot of web links for learning more information. And if there's nothing else on this chapter, then let's move on to.
I think at this point, we'll look for Board of Supervisors comments on chapter 4.
So Dave, I have a couple comments if I could take the group through that. So I know you said you don't want discussion, so I'll just say what they are, then the PC can decide how they want to handle it. So
Right.
Janine, I hate to do this to you. I'm going to take you back to the beginning of why community input. Could start there. And just to remind you, right there, thank you. At the last meeting, we did talk about, I thought we agreed, that the percentages, we would put the actual numbers. So it would be 70%, and then whatever 70% is of the 513 people. So it would be 70%, comma, 400 people. So it's just a matter, it gets back to John's comment, provide some context in terms of how many people actually agreed to this. So we did agree to do that for the previous chapter, at least that's by recollection, so I would suggest we do it here. Do you want me to go on, or just do you want to talk about that, or?
I think it's best to talk about it. So it gets back to Paul Legassi's point that if we did it in one chapter one way, we should be consistent. So for those that were there last month, is that what we agreed on doing?
I believe we did, but anybody else?
Yeah, I believe we did.
I know we had numbers there, yeah, when we talked about it.
So I think we want to be, I don't think we will be consistent, and we would recommend putting in the numbers as well as percentages.
Great. Thank you. And Janine, when you're ready, I would take you back to John Gooder's spot on open space and parklands, where we decided to put the information about the vote, the community vote. Just have a additional comment for that section.
If I could go from there, Donna. So that community vote was not to
So
spend
wait,
additional.
Nancy, let me go.
More?
Well, let me go through my comments and, however
Okay.
Dave wants to do it. Dave, do you want to do section by section? Is that the best way to do it?
Well, so what it is to make comments, and then the planning commission will decide how to alter the document and then send it forward. So Donna, if you make your comment, and then Nancy, if you want to make your comment.
Okay, all right. So, so I'm going to move on to another section. Is that all right, Dave? Another section in chapter 4. Is that okay? Is that what you want me to do?
So you didn't have any changes to what John said, or any further other than to support it?
I have a comment in that section. So it's on the open space and parkland section. John had suggested to put and you agreed to put the information on the vote. I also have some wording that I had provided to the PC before. I can send it to you again, but where I thought we should put some information on the loan. And so I just created some wording that talks about in 2002 that we initiated an open space program, that it was a 0.5 mil real estate tax by referendum, and that funds would be dedicated to land acquisition, that a major component of this funding came from this $3.5 million loan, but the payoff is for July 2040, and the annual cost of this loan is $167,000 per year. That exceeds dedicated tax receipts, and that this is made up by the general fund. So it's in addition to what John has said. It's just to provide some context on the loan, and I'm happy to send. I can read it again slower, but I'm happy to send that information to Janine if you believe you want to put something about the loan in this section.
What I would ask, does any planning commissioners have any questions about that?
I agree with it right up until I believe the last portion was editorializing a little bit by adding additional information about the total fund. So go ahead and read it again.
Let me go slower for you, and then you can tell me what you're not happy with. So I said in 2002, the township initiated an open space program by establishing a 0.5 mil real estate tax by referendum, with funds dedicated to land acquisition for the primary purpose of limiting the amount of available land for residential development. A major component of the township's funding came from a $3.5 million loan. The payoff date for this loan is July 2040. The annual cost of the loan service is $176,000 a year, which exceeds the dedicated tax receipts. An annual deficiency of $73,000 is made up by the general fund.
So the last portion is the portion I would like. I like everything right up until when you talk about exceeding.
To the PC. I mean, I'm fine with that, whatever you want, Chuck.
So I would, before we move on, and then is there any comments for this section from other supervisors?
Yeah, if I could just mention a few things, and this is information I learned. This was before my time, but so yes, Donna's right. The referendum was a 0.5% mill, and we are required to spend that money on open space because that's what the public voted for. So that money cannot be allocated anywhere else. When the township decided to install a cell phone tower, there's a public record of the Board of Supervisors saying, though that revenue will go to parks and open space. And there was a parks and open space account. When the previous board came in, they moved that money to the general fund. Well, that money is about $90K per year right now. So I'm not sure it's appropriate to say that we are overspending the open space budget each year. And I don't know how much, Donna, you would propose that you're saying we are overspending. But I think it's important to make those notes. And I also think the survey was statistically accurate. So folks might not like the information, but it's like voting in a general election. Even if even if we don't like the outcome, we have to go by the American way, which is democracy. I don't think I mean, this is just an aspirational document. So no one is saying that we should spend more than our budget on open space. That's not in any aspect, but it doesn't mean that we can't spend part of our budget on open space. And it's clearly important to the public. They're here because of open space. So it's certainly something we all value. I don't have specific content for that, but I just wanted to give a perspective that maybe hasn't been shared yet. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. And I think, at least the way I understand it is that by striking the last, what Chuck was saying, addresses the point that you're bringing up, Nancy. So thank you. Donna, did you want to move on to your next?
I'm happy to. So the next place I went to is, so it's a little bit, it's on, it's 4.3 open space preservation is where I went to next.
I'm sorry. So I didn't ask the full planning commission. Do we want to incorporate the detail of the open space fund?
I said yes with the modification.
I would agree.
I don't think it's harmful, so I think I'm fine with it.
All right, so we will.
Yes, so are you all right, Dave? Do you want me to move on?
Yes, sorry. Go move to your next item.
So I'm in 4.3, Janine, open space preservation. Why do this? Thanks. So I'll put this out there for the PC. When I read this document, I was a bit confused about open space preservation versus conservation easements. And I had a request, or I have a request, that I'd like to have something, I don't know if it's here, I would think here, that we talk about the difference between open space preservation and conservation easements. Because from a board perspective, and I think talking to some people also, it's not so much about buying additional open space that the township has to manage, but about preserving land so it's not developed. So I don't have those words, and Janine, I probably am not the expert to write it, but I would like, if people agree, that there's a distinction made here, that our preferences for easements, open space preservation, of course, if the right opportunity comes, but really not something that the township wants to get involved in, because it is about maintenance and taking care of land versus putting an easement on it. So I'll open that up.
Preservation is an easement. It is one, and it's not any different. I just want to explain that in the context of the technical document. There's different ways you can do open space preservation, but to truly have land preserved as open space, it needs a restrictive covenant, some kind of deed restriction, or a conservation easement. So I think that's a little bit different than the ownership. It's more just the actual tool. I just wanted
I thought the same thing. I think there's ag easement and there's conservation easement, and those are both under the umbrella of open space.
Can that be explained somewhere, or because obviously I'm confused. Is there a possibility to explain that somewhere in this document, and to state that the preference is for easements?
I mean, I think the document talks about easements. I don't think the document ever says, we talked about this before in the last task force meeting, if you all remember, and this exact same comment came up. And my understanding was that we combed the document at that point, and nobody could find anything that actually said the township would purchase open space, or the preference was the township would be responsible or purchase whatever additional open space. I remember we did that at the time. So it's not that we can't add it, it's I'm not sure how to add it because there's nothing in here that actually says the opposite policy.
Actually, if you go to 4.3.5, there's a whole section about land stewardship and maintenance and open space projects. So even though it doesn't say it specifically, it's not clear. So it talks about money going to the land maintenance and stewardship. So the fact that the task force made the decision to put this information here, that they thought it was important, it could confuse people like me that isn't understanding the differences. It's just an issue that is confusing to me. If everyone else is fine with it,
Yeah.
I don't want to push it, but I'll just put it out there as a comment.
Thanks, Don.
Law was
So as far as that, does the planning commissioners have, do you feel, I guess for lack of asking question, are you confused as Donna? Or do you feel that the document addresses different types of ways to preserve open space?
I think preservation's fine. You put easement in, you get it more specific. Preservation's a broader term, probably.
Hey, Dave, it's Jim Johnston.
would-
What's the harm in defining it? What's the harm in defining the terms?
So
I think it's a separate issue, what the township would prefer to do, but what's the harm in defining the terms that Donna just laid out?
So my thought on this is that we don't run into this. I think it's more of a supervisor's conversation than a planning board. Because we don't get involved in it.
To you, it's the same, is what you're saying, right?
Say that again?
To the planning, they mean the same thing. It's still open space. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but mostly because it's at a detail level that we're not that familiar with because we don't deal with it.
Right, that's what I'm trying, yeah, I got you.
So if we can
This
wait.
may be a,
Before the
I was gonna say,
board.
this might be a conversation to punt to us when we get to it.
Right.
Right,
Yeah,
And we
I'm
can-
not seeing a lot of traction from the planning commissioners, so.
that's fine. Well, I guess, Dave, my goal was to try to get a document in front of the board that was as clean as possible so we could just sign it, but maybe that's not doable. We'll have to do some work on it, and that's fine. I think the PC has to do what they're comfortable with. So I'll move on so we can, get done sometime today. So Janine, you're actually in a good spot. If you could just scroll down just a little bit more, I want to get the word understand. Yeah. So just for the PC, if you could look at that second bullet point under 4.3.1, it says understand and then help I think you mean weigh various preservation opportunities to ensure that Franklin is leveraging as much money for land conservation as possible. I can deal with this with the board, but I have a problem with that sentence. We as a township have to balance priorities, and I'm not leveraging as much money as possible for anything. I want to make sure that we are funding things that need to be funded and get a balance, more of a balance than anything else. So just once again, I'll put that out to the PC and then I'll move on.
Donna, I'm not sure, by leveraging, I think we mean other sources. I know with the 40 million, at least that much was leveraged with grants and outside sources. I'm thinking that's what's being referenced, but Janine, you may be able to help us clarify that.
I would be in favor of changing the wording to clarify that it's other sources myself.
I think the term leverage
Leverage.
indicates that we're putting in some to get more or something, and that's not a good, yeah, that's, I agree that that is not something we want to be making that statement.
If I may, I'm thinking back to the planning commission, the actual comp plan meeting that we talked about this, and I can't remember. I'm surprised I remember this detail, but we were pretty focused on external, like grants and ag easement type situations. We weren't talking about optimizing the township budget to funnel money into open space projects. It was more about, let's find out what's available and do that as much as possible. I think it's inelegantly stated here. So how do we streamline that to say, maybe aggressively pursue alternative funding sources for open space or something like that? But I know that the intent of the task force wasn't to, rejigger the current budget to maximize open space. It was more about maximizing our efforts looking for alternative funding. That's how I remember it. I don't know if anybody else who was on the task force remembers that conversation the same way I do, but that's how I remembered it. So if there's a more elegant or succinct way of stating that we were trying to focus on external funding sources, I would suggest that be the wording.
I think the task force thought the word leveraging automatically meant other funding sources.
Yeah.
Remembering of it all. I don't think we talked about it any further because I think the word leveraging meant the township was going to leverage.
Yeah.
So
it just
clarify
it might be worth
yeah. But I'm going to copy this statement over here so we can, if we want to make any changes.
Yeah, I think if you just say external sources, I think you solve it. I mean, that makes perfect sense. But
leverage external funding. Yeah.
You're right.
I'm almost done, Dave, I promise. So, well, wait till you're ready, Jenny.
Oh. You can
I
go
think
ahead.
there was enough comments from the PC members that we want to change leveraging to pursuing all possible external sources or something like that.
I would agree. I would agree with that. The term leverage to me means that you got to put money into it. So I would get rid of that word.
I agree with Chuck.
I agree.
Okay. Okay, Donna.
Okay, so two more. So this is 4.4-3.4, the how. And it's the second bullet point in that listing. And I'll wait till you get to Jenny.
Okay, sorry about that. What was that?
4,
You
3,
can answer
4.
one thing at a time. It's 4-3.4. It's the second bullet point. So it's just more of a clarification. It says the Pro Board can use this evaluation to create a tiered list of priorities that should be the focus of future preservation efforts. And what I'm suggesting to the PC is that we add in here the Pro Board can use the evaluation to create a tiered list of priorities that once agreed with the board, can be used as a focus for future preservation efforts. I think the Pro Board is very important, but I think the work that it does, it needs to have that alignment with the board. And then once that alignment exists, then you use it for a strategic direction.
Agreed.
Agree.
Agree.
I'm fine with it.
You want me to read it again, Janine, or are you okay?
Hold on. Let me just get it all in here and then I can just add the words you want to add. Okay, the Pro Board can use the evaluation to create a tiered list of priorities.
That once agreed with the board.
At once?
Right, so it's that once agreed. So what the ONCE, agree with the board. And I would say can be the focus of future preservation efforts, but I don't care if should or can. Okay, and then my last comment has to do with something that we discussed at the last meeting. And I'm gonna have you move up, Janine, to 4.4-3.3, the last bullet point. And it has to do with the cell tower. We did talk about that, and we decided that a comprehensive plan shouldn't be talking about sources of money, that's something that should be handled by the board, and we had agreed to take it out, but I'll let the PC see if they remember it the same way.
No, we
We did
agreed to
agree.
that last time.
And that's it for me, Dave, thank you.
Thank you. Any other supervisors for chapter 4?
I'm good.
I don't have anything either.
You want to take it out, Donna?
Yes, I want to delete, we agreed to delete it at the last meeting. And I think
Well,
we
that wasn't a supervisor's discussion. That was a planning commission discussion.
Correct. So it's
I
gonna be.
don't really see the downside of keeping it in there. It says, consider using some earnings, which is what we committed to the public, from the cell phone tower that is on township property, could be used to leverage funding for, I don't understand what worries you
So
about that.
I'll just go back to what Dave said. So Dave asked us to make our comments. He said, we made the comments, the PC talks about it. And I think, Nancy, if you're not in agreement, I'm perfectly fine for us to bring it up when the board gets this plan, but,
Yeah, so,
Okay, that's fine.
but I think I heard enough from the planning commissioners that we're recommending to remove it right now. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. Any other areas, comments from the supervisors? We'll move on to comments for chapter 4 from the public.
Oh, I'd like to make some comments. You could just stay right where you are on the last comment, that cell phone tower. I'm fine with taking it out, but I didn't know if the planning commission is aware that when that cell phone tower was erected, there was a hot debate at the public meetings for the Board of Supervisors documented in the minutes, where the board clearly stated that those funds from that tower would be used for open space. And so it seems like Donna's is trying to hide that or something. I don't know. It's just, she's right though.
Somewhere along the line, the board changed their minds. I wasn't on the board then, but somewhere it was changed, or because it was moved.
So it's fine to take it out. That's,
All right.
it's just, I just wanted the planning commission to know that that was documented in a public record, that was the intent of the cell phone tower.
Great.
All right, could you?
Thanks, Paul. And
Oh.
there again, we're not looking for discussion. We're just looking for input. So thanks.
I do want to comment on John's analysis of the survey. Nancy said it pretty well, but for him to take the statistics of a 13% sample and then say it's only 10% of the population, I think he needs a refresher on statistics, that is a statistically representative sample of the township for a randomly selected population and should be considered representative of the whole. And when we asked Janine about this in the planning commission meeting, she said our sample returns were good compared to most townships. So maybe Janine, is that true? Do we have a good sample return or a poor sample return, or what do you think of our sample return? Our question.
Sorry. After the last task force meeting, I remember there was a email about the Tredyffrin Township comp plan that had just been adopted. And Tredyffrin Township has a population that's, I think, 3 times as large as Franklin. And they had a similar return of surveys for an online survey. So that's a direct comparison of a comp plan, a very different township, but a comp plan that was just adopted in Chester County. So percentage wise, it's actually a much lower percentage of the population. And,
I appreciate the comment, and yet I'm trying, we, at least correct me if I'm wrong, other planning commissioners, but we didn't change anything to suggest that all we asked was that the percentages and the numbers that were voted were placed in this section of the comp plan. Is that correct?
I would agree. We're
That's
simply
correct.
trying to
And-
do the same thing with every one of them.
And I
Right.
think that's a good compromise, Dave. I like that. Donna had suggested that. I like it, but I couldn't let that stand since this meeting's being recorded. That would be the public record that this survey only represents 10% of the people, because that is not correct. That is not
Okay.
the way to look at it, right?
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yep. Any
That's
other
all my
comments?
comment.
Paul?
Nope, that's it.
No, thank you. Any other public comment?
Sean Auerbach, I got a couple of comments. One, just on the discussion we had a little while ago about land preservation. I think the concern is that preservation by ag easement or by conservation easement is more or less acceptable because you're putting in a small portion of the value of the land to save it from development. I think what people don't want is an outright purchase of land. So I think that's the way you got to characterize this thing. You don't want to purchase land outright. We already own 4 large parcels that unfortunately some were low value land and we have to maintain them. So I think there's a strong objection on the board and others that they don't want to purchase the land. So I think you got to distinguish preservation from an outright purchase where you end up owning the land and have to maintain it. So you could develop some language about that, and I think that would clear up that whole discussion.
Well, if I'm allowed to comment, I don't know that we can say that. I mean, there's always going to be different supervisors, and we haven't asked the community that. So it's presumptuous of us to assume that for the community.
Thank you for both those comments.
We already own 4 pieces of land. At least 3 of them we should have never bought. You ought to not do that again. That takes up a tremendous amount of money. That's really how you got into the $3.5 million loan. I got a couple of comments on the survey. The 10% participation is extremely low, somewhere around 11%. And I think it's representative. I disagree with Paul. I'll give you an example how a survey like that failed. The survey that was taken in 2004, the Community Value Survey, had a very similar response, somewhere around 10-12%. And that survey, the basis of that survey was used to promote a very aggressive open space purchase program in the year 2000 to 2010, where the $3.5 million loan was taken out. And when the board tried to get some more money and floated a referendum out there to raise taxes further, it was rejected strongly. So I could tell you that a survey with that kind of participation failed in that respect. They used the survey to justify all those land purchases. When it came to a strong vote on a referendum, the voters rejected it. So I stand by the fact that both of these surveys have very low participation and should be taken fairly lightly.
All right. Thanks, John. Any other comments, John, for chapter 4?
Not now.
All right, thank you. Then reverting back to the Planning Commission, do we have any further changes for Janine based on supervisors and public comment? I think we've done them.
No.
Are we ready to move on to chapter 5?
Can I just ask, Janine, do you want me to send you the wording I had read before about the loan? I can send that to you as an email. Would that be helpful?
You can, but I think what we decided to do, if I'm correct, is that there's the other write-up for the open space vote. And I think somebody had said the Planning Commission at the next meeting was going to review that wording.
This is something else. This is the wording I had read that that was commented on by the PC. It had to do with the loan itself. So the 2011 was about the vote. I read previously some wording about the loan. So
Okay.
I can send that to you separately, so you
can
have that.
send it to me, and then whatever language should be for the vote also. If that could be sent to me also, then what I can do is I can put that language both, in this errata item so that people can see it, on the screen next time around. That'd be a good.
Right, and the vote information is coming from Jeff.
Okay, I just
Right.
where everybody sees it, on the screen, and it's all.
Right, and you'll have the next
Yeah,
meeting, so then everybody can see it again.
that works. As long as that's okay. I don't want to speak out of turn. As long as it's okay with the planning commission, I'm fine with that.
Yes.
So I'm just going to write a note that Donna will email fund wording. Okay, so should we move on to chapter 5?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. So chapter 5 is trail and pedestrian connections. And this gets into your, what I call your non-vehicular network. So your vehicular network is covered in another chapter. So that has not been ignored. It's just another priority subject. So this covers trails, and the task force talked a lot about what term to use for the pedestrian network. And it was decided not to use the word sidewalk because the implication was with sidewalks, there were defined curbs and other sorts of features. So the task force felt more comfortable using pathway or walkway. The reason I'm telling you that is because you'll see that throughout the document. And then, of course, your more traditional trails, which people generally know what, that means in your parks and sometimes within your communities. So this also covers, it covers I guess I'm going to call like the trails that would be within your preserves and your parks, and then covers what another community might call sidewalks, but you're calling pathways or walkways. So the goal for this chapter, does anybody have any comments on that?
I do. So we had a lot of conversation about how we were going to connect the residents to parks and other destinations. And this reads more about connecting, well, it says connects parks, preserves, neighborhoods, and other destinations. So it doesn't talk about the residents. So I would like to revise that to say, retain and expand multi-use trails and pedestrian path infrastructure to connect all residents to local pedestrian paths. Focus should be made to connect the infrastructure to current and future parks, preserves, churches, schools, wineries, restaurants, and other destinations. Care should be made to foster Campbellsville as a recreation destination. And my intent there is simply to point the focus back to the resident, our residents gaining access to our pedestrian circulation, as opposed to creating places for someone to drive into our township, park, and use our pedestrian circulation. And we talked about that a lot in the task force.
Sounds like you're including what's there but making it even more inclusive.
Yeah, trying to point it back to residents, connect residents.
Any comments from the other commissioners? Alternates? Do we like it?
I'm not sure. Suppose a resident doesn't want to be connected.
Well, they don't have to walk. We don't allow properties that don't have roads connecting to them.
A road isn't a walkway.
Can we word it that somehow, Chuck, that it allows all residents instead
Sure.
of protecting them?
Sure.
Are we okay with that if we had? Anybody out there?
Yep, I'm okay with it.
Yep.
Great, then let's make the change. Do you want all that wording sent to you, Janine?
If you're all okay with me receiving it by email, then I can do that.
I am. We'd have a chance next week, next month to look at it again.
Okay, I'm just gonna put it like that then. Okay, going into the background information then. So community input, again, same sort of thing you saw before, survey. And then during the planning process, there was this other input. Does anybody have any comments about this? And again, we've already, add the numbers that you already mentioned in the other comment. Can I move on? Is that okay? Okay.
Yes.
For what the context, Chester County again, and then the regional context. Does anybody have any comments on that? And then we get into the existing conditions of what's happening in Franklin Township. And then listing the different preserves, park that do have some kind of a trail in them. That's why not all the preserves, et cetera, are listed. We're just focusing on the ones that have a trail. And then moving down, we get into recommendations and actions. So the first general recommendation is promote pedestrian connections. And then there's a write-up on why we're doing this. Are there any questions about that?
Why we do this? Yep.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
No, I was looking where we were. I'm waiting for
Oh, okay.
511.
Okay. So then the first action item is updating the trail feasibility study that was in your current comprehensive plan.
Were there any maps that we were supposed to review under the last section?
Oh, sorry.
Oops.
There
How
were
about
maps.
we get back to them at the end of
Oops.
the narrative in chapter 5? Or do you want to go?
No, we're halfway through this. I
Yeah.
think I agree with you. Just keep
So
going.
update the trail feasibility study. Then the next recommendation was develop the official map. And then the next action was develop the official map. And then the next action was work to obtain easements.
So with I had I asked the question about non-motorized and where do e-bikes fit in there?
Man, that's a loaded question. And is it e-bike? What's the horsepower on an e-bike? You know, it's such a loaded question. And do we talk about just e-bikes, or what about the scooters? Because I've seen scooters pass motorcycles. By scooters, I mean the ones that you stand and hold.
Yeah, it seems like a small question, but I mean,
It's a big question.
obviously, we don't want to keep folks that need the assistance of an e-bike from enjoying the trails and parks.
Do we do a speed limit? It's a great question. I saw one of those scooters pass a motorcycle. It was like, wow.
Yeah, some of them are fast.
Yeah. That's got to be a lot of road rash. That's got to hurt.
Well, we're talking about walking trails, and I guess the only issue really is people who can't walk, who might have, you know, an assisted wheelchair or a motorized wheelchair. Those would probably be acceptable. Do we really want dirt bikes and stuff like that going on those trails?
No,
When you
but
get
we're
into
calling them
bikes-
multi-use. We're calling them multi-use trails. So the question is, where do we draw the line?
Well, that's what I'm thinking, but
You know, multi-use is rarely ever considered in how it's used in at least planning terms. It's rare. It's not considered your more traditional motorized vehicles.
But an e-bike basically looks like a regular mountain bike with a fat down tube, and that's all. That's all, you know, that's all. And then there's such a range of those.
There are a range of those.
So, I mean, maybe not get bogged down tonight. I mean, a comprehensive plan is a roadmap. Whereas if we implement these trails, I think maybe an e-bike would be more getting back to your speed limit issue, Chuck, or ways to address it, that the signage, and when we do have these trails, we come up somehow then to include e-bikes, but exclude dirt bikes and motorcycles. Or do you?
Yeah, but I think we have to start considering that we might not allow, I mean, I've seen advertisements for e-bikes that they look more like a motorcycle than an e-bike, to be honest. I mean, they're starting to get that chunky where, you know, so there's no motor. I mean, there's no engine, but there's a significant battery, and it's.
I had a conversation earlier today with somebody at one of the larger private schools that the security team has e-bikes, and I said, "Are they pedaling?" He says, "I haven't seen them pedal at all." So you definitely can use an e-bike as a trail bike or a dirt bike.
Yeah, it's
Well,
a
it just
Tesla e-bike, right? It's a Tesla e-bike, so it's like, yeah.
It depends what kind of bike it is. But it sounds like it's something that the supervisors would need to work on with an ordinance in the future. And generally, we take advantage of other townships who have talked through it as a starting point.
Thanks. I think it gets back to like what Chuck and I said. It probably gets more down into the implementation than in the comprehensive plan. I'm fine if we leave it the way it is. Anybody else?
or
Fine. Or we can add a little section that just talks about the fact that we have to consider it. It's just a consideration, just a note that we're to think about it. Question would be, where does it go?
Right.
I would say it should just go right in here. I would say it's another bullet point if you're going to add that. Because this isn't always, this isn't always action steps. Sometimes it's background information. So you could say something, come up with wording of what you want to consider. That would seem most appropriate, just to, add it in here since we're mentioning it.
You want me to put something together
Sure.
as a
If-
bullet point?
Sure.
Sure. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm going to make a note on page 3. Okay, so then developing an official map to identify locations of future multi-trails. Is there anything on that?
Gives the township the right of first refusal for acquisition.
That's how the official map works under the municipalities planning code.
Sounds a little scary as a landowner, but
Well, it's if the landowner is going to sell their property.
right.
To sell the property, then the township gets the right of first refusal. So yeah.
Is anybody I can say that question for Mark Thompson or whatever. How the code makes it actually work, but
Yeah, it sounds very frightening. As you said, it's like a landowner. That sounds very frightening. And the question is that does that become enabled when we put it in here? Or does that become enabled some other way, which is a Mark Thompson question?
Well, you would have to actually have an official map and an ordinance.
Okay.
This is the recommendation to develop an official map. Official map under the municipalities planning code is literally a map. It's kind of a goofy name and it's confusing, but it is actually a thing called an official map. And then there's an ordinance that, the township would draft and adopt associated with it.
Huh.
are we okay with that as a PC?
Is that just bare land or developed land? In other words, if you had a house on that, does that include properties with houses or just properties that are undeveloped?
You would
And
have to,
also on the map. It all depends on what you have shown on the map.
the map identifies certain properties?
Yeah, it's generally a way for, I don't know, I'm just going to make up a scenario right now that has nothing to do with Franklin Township. But if there's a property here and a property here, and there's a trail, let's say between the two properties, the official map might say in the future, the township would like to have a trail built on this property and this property, so that the trail in the middle has further connections. So if somebody sells their property for development, let's just say, then those two properties will be in the official map. And then the idea is that a trail would be, an area of trail easement would be reserved on whatever's happening on those properties. It's probably not a great example, but it gives you the picture of what it is. So you would go through a public process to identify whatever you would identify on the official map. Some municipalities identify future parklands, some identify trail opportunities, some identify future open space opportunities. Some identify future, maybe municipal facilities. Maybe there's a property that they think would be good for a municipal facility, whatever it is, municipal building, etc. So those could be identified on an official map. It's basically to use a bad analogy, it's almost like the road map for how some of the capital or built elements could be implemented.
So if I was a landowner owner and I had a theoretical trail and I had a person who wanted to buy it, and that person wanted to close. Before I could do that, I'd have to go to the township to give them the right of first refusal and potentially lose that sale.
It depends on how your ordinance is structured. It's not just a map, it's a map and an ordinance, just like, any other ordinance in the township. It depends on how it's worded. So no, it doesn't have to be worded that way.
Okay.
It's hard to believe that's legal. It's an interesting concept.
So, I mean, we've asked the questions, and as a planning commission, do we want to get rid of 512 completely, I guess, because it's associated with the official map, which refers us back to chapter 4 then too, or just leave it as is? And
Well, do we have to keep the section that talks about first refusal in there? Can we keep everything and give the township? Or does that not make any sense, Janine? I don't understand it.
right,
You can get rid of those words, but that's what the purpose is under the municipalities planning code.
Got it.
Effectively to say, this is the strategy, and because we're in trails, I'm just going to use trails as an example here. This is the strategy. Pedestrian connections are important to us in the municipality, and we want to have a way going forward in the future to let developers buying properties know that this is of interest to us. So somebody coming in is transparent on what the township is interested in. So it's not later, oh, wait a minute, we wanted a trail. So you put the possible connections, and this could be for sidewalks, it could be for walkways, etc. I'm just using trails, a general caveat.
It can be for roads, right?
It could be for roads, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, municipalities that maybe want to put in more of a village or a traditional neighborhood development could lay out roadways as well. Maybe they want the road to be in a grid and they don't want to be curvilinear, and to put forth their idea, they want a grid in this area. It's all laid out. So when somebody comes in, there's no surprises. It just says, okay, we're coming in, we're looking at this property. It's kind of a disclosure situation. We're looking at property X. Okay, well, there's a trail on one side, there's a trail on the other side. The township would like it so the residents can get from one side to the other. So we know when we buy this property, that's of interest to the township to talk further about. So it's kind of the nature of just how the structure of it works, of what an official map is, the purpose of it.
It's
But
to
Janine, can
so we could,
the buyers say, I don't want to do that, or by law, they have to do it? The prospective buyer, can they say, I don't want the trail? Or do they, because it's on the official map, do they have to agree to it?
Well, there has to be a discussion about it. That's why it says there has to be a right of first refusal. There has to be a discussion about it. Whether they can refuse it or not, I think that's a Mark Thompson question. As we all know, the municipalities planning code is the enabling legislation for all of this. But in some areas of the municipalities planning code, there's more details, and in some, details, and by design. Some of it is to specifically allow municipalities to fill in those details. It's a structure. So I would feel more comfortable when we're in this level of detail of conversation, talking to your solicitor about, that very level of detail, because the ordinance that's associated with the map starts to define how all of this works rather than just the map itself.
I think we're talking about the Campbellsville bypass. I think that's where it's potentially a real thing. That
And
would
maybe,
be,
I'm sorry.
that would be my, actually, it's kind of odd that we're talking about it in multi-use trails. It's probably more applicable for something like that.
Well, I mean, there's eminent domain and that's a different, I don't think I understand this, Janine, but,
This isn't eminent domain. This is the township gets a shot at saying, we would like a trail here. Let's talk about the trail being here.
okay, so the intersection at 841 and 896, that's more eminent domain. If that becomes a circle. Sorry, okay, let's just not worry about it. I think we need Mark's help on this.
And we could get rid of the words, I think Chuck maybe said, maybe get rid of the words right of first refusal and just say enabled under the MPC. And then obviously, if you even move forward with this recommendation, there would be a whole nother conversation about what exactly is enabled under the MPC, what's not, how this will be structured. So maybe it's clearer to just say are enabled under the MPC and then talk about, the details then. That might be better.
No, I like the fact that it's in there so that we all know what it means. I don't think any of us would have batted an eye, but we wouldn't have really known what that actually means. So I think it's good that it's in there.
But it's not eminent domain. It is acquisition. It is acquisition or easement. So that's a different situation.
I think that's what everybody is concerned about, is that it would be a purchase at putting a landowner at a disadvantage. I think that's what we're all concerned about.
That's my concern.
We need Mark to weigh in. How do we do that, Dave?
We ask him to come to the May meeting. I think to keep moving, we can put an asterisk next to this, or
Yeah, let's move on because we can't answer this here.
yeah,
We need Mark.
Do you want me to put something on the errata then? Is that what you're?
please. Yeah,
Page 3. Okay.
all right, thank you.
Okay, so the next action item is work to obtain easements for the multi-use trail. Does anybody have any comments about this item? Develop outreach materials to highlight opportunities that are existing in the township. And then the next recommendation is how to support the existing township parks and preserves. And then there's a write-up on why do this. The first action item is to add wayfinding signage so that people know where the preserves are, and once they're in the preserves and park, they know where they're headed in terms of the trails. Then the next action item would be consider opportunities for nature education. And then talks those opportunities, promoting volunteer opportunities to help with the maintenance of the parks and preserves the township has.
This overlaps a little bit with 3, doesn't it? Some of the discussions there.
A little bit, yeah. From a different angle, but.
Yeah.
And then working with the Land Conservancy on sustainability demonstration projects. And this is on township properties. And then the next one is engaging in regional coordination. And this came about because Franklin's surrounded by so much other trails, parks, open space, et cetera, being the largest contiguous network of such things in the Mid-Atlantic region. Working with neighbors, neighbor communities on this interconnected trail and pedestrian network. And then providing updated information for the transportation improvement inventory. And then, of course, the relationship to the township vision. Does anybody have any comments on any of this?
The planning commission good?
Yep.
Yep. I'm good.
Any comments on chapter 5 from supervisors?
So Dave, I have two comments. My first comment is on 5-1.3, the how. It's the easement section. So it's the second bullet point. So I also thought we talked about this at the last meeting, but it's fine, we'll talk about it again. So I'm not in support of this statement because it takes discretion away from the Board of Supervisors regarding pedestrian walkways and just says, no, this needs to be done all the time. I'm fine if we say there's a preference for this, for these pedestrian walkways, but I would not support taking this discretion from Board of Supervisors when it comes to looking at plans and deciding whether we need concrete or sidewalks or pathways or what.
So right now our saldo says sidewalks, right, for any major plan?
It says
And we
sidewalk
always-
at the discretion.
In the saldo, we always give a waiver if we don't want them, but now we've kind of gone to where we're putting them on more of we're requiring it in more of the plans. So saldo always does allow for a waiver, but our practice has been that you got to prove the hardship to get the waiver, or that we want, as a township, desire to give the waiver, like we have with the sidewalks in the past. So
My recollection was,
require.
so my recollection was that actually we were changing it. It used to say sidewalks and we were changing it to pedestrian walkways and or other appropriate. That was my recollection when this was written.
Right,
Not
I
that-
think Donna's question is just that it requires pedestrian walkways.
But we already, yeah, my point is I believe we already do.
Right,
But
and we're,
it sounds like we're saying the discretion is no longer there. So it sounds like the way I'm reading it is that we want to now require it, and it says current rules have it at the discretion of the board. So it sounds like that's being taken away.
You're reading it
And it-
correctly, Donna. If I can just interject really quickly, the discussion for my memory it was twofold. One was correct, sidewalks are not the correct terminology, pedestrian walkways are. That was the first item of discussion. The second item of discussion was, in the past, the majority of developments have received a waiver to not have any kind of pedestrian facilities. And so now the neighborhoods are not connected to the township preserves and the park, and then other preserves and parks in the area that our township owned. And part of the reason is because waivers were granted for most, if not all, developments. So the task force discussion was to allow neighborhoods and residents to be connected to these other facilities. How are we going to do that? So the wording should be changed to require in zoning and subdivision. That's the background explanation, and it's twofold, the word and then also the require.
We change it from requiring pedestrian walkways to require pedestrian easements. So for the future, if it ever comes to that, we've got the ability to do something like that, but it would be with township monies. We put something in now, it's concrete, lasts 20 years, it starts breaking up, and nobody's used it, could be a waste of money. An easement might accomplish the same thing.
You're talking about an easement out of the side of a development, not all along. I think the key
I'm not
is,
talking, I'm not getting specific, I'm just saying whatever makes sense, but instead of putting in something that's hard, have the ability to put in something hard in the future.
I think by putting something like this in zoning is really gonna cause trouble. I think you can still state required in the saldo and give the Board of Supervisors the opportunity to grant waivers versus requiring somebody to go to potentially for a zoning hearing board to get rid of a trail to nowhere.
Yeah, the trail to nowhere is the problem. I agree.
Any, what the thoughts on the supervisors or planning commission?
So
We definitely
from
want
my-
to keep, go ahead.
Yeah, I think what the language that I don't like in is the requires. Like I think that we want to keep future boards to have them have some flexibility in decision making. So I think if there's a way that we can state the intent, right? This is an aspirational document. So the intent is we have an opportunity to have this discussion. If something like this comes before the board has the opportunity to have this discussion. But I don't know if I like it sounds like the comp plan is writing an ordinance is how I'm reading it. And that's not, I don't think that, I'm not sure if that's the intent of the comp plan. That would be, comp plan would say, here's the aspiration. And then the board at their discretion would write the ordinance that would require these things, right?
So for the comp plan, it might be just changing amend and to something to visit or not visit, but to review zoning in Saldo.
Can we just take the word require and use the word promote to promote pedestrian walkways?
That might be a better way of saying it. I think that better captures the intent, and then we as a board could decide at some point to require it.
Right.
Right.
So
Yeah.
promote gets into a planning perspective, requirement gets into an ordinance perspective.
Yeah, when the supervisors come around to writing an ordinance or approving an ordinance, that's where you would visit whether it's required. But for planning, propose, yeah. I like that.
I like promote.
Promote.
You could just delete amend zoning and SLO to require, just start off with promote pedestrian walkways in all developed areas in the township.
That's good too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like
And then
that.
keep.
Good, Donna.
Okay, you don't want to say how you're going to do it then. You want to eliminate how you're going to do it and just say promote in general policy.
Yes.
Is that the final consensus, or is that what we should put down?
Yes.
And I have one last one. I hope that should not be contentious, but I'll wait till Janine gets there.
Is that a challenge?
And no, it should be. I'm hoping I'm hoping everybody would say, yeah, that's what we always meant for it to be. But well, you never know.
We can dig deep and find something to be upset about.
No, I hope not. We all love the pros, so I don't think it's going to be a problem. It has to do with 5.3.1. It's the second bullet when Janine gets there.
5.3.1?
Correct. Yeah, the how to engage in regional coordination. Yeah, 5.3. So I think it starts with form. So it says, so it's second bullet, form an official trail and pathways committee to provide neighborhood and municipalities with a point of contact which to coordinate initiatives. My recommendation is that the pro does that. We don't need to form a committee. They're already very much involved in trails and working on this whole idea of interconnectivity. So I just thought it would make things simpler if we just stuck with the pro to do this.
So we should change the reference the pro instead.
What was that?
We should change this to reference the pro instead, I think is what.
Yes, yeah.
Well, it says form, and we already have the pro, so maybe you just take it out.
Well, I think it's yeah, but you could say something, because leave it up to the pro to decide whether or not they need that, right? So you leave it in saying this is the intent is we want a group of people who will work on this, right? And so you want to identify who would spearhead that. And I think Donna's right, it's the pro. And then the pro can decide whether or not they need, more people to work on it.
Right, and they could do that in their current structure. You don't need a new committee. They could.
The intention is there. Who does it is kind of immaterial, but we want to make sure that the intention is captured, rather than just striking the whole comment, I think.
That's all I have, David. Thank you.
I mean, wouldn't we just say the pro will provide a point of contact for neighboring municipalities?
Yep. I think so.
Yeah.
Instead of saying that the pro has to consider an additional committee.
Yeah. I think Chuck was trying to say that they're doing that anyway, right?
Right.
Yeah, no, I think it's just about, we're trying to just, I think everybody's in agreement. We just need to get it written.
Okay.
I like what you've written.
All right. Any other supervisors' comments on chapter 5? Move on to public comment.
Yes, John Auerbach. I've got some comments on trails. Just an initial comment, listening to the concepts that Janine just went over. As a property owner, I find those rather threatening, quite frankly, to my autonomy, security, and privacy, that level of planning. But I got to read my notes here. During the discussion and development of the trail maps, numerous proposed trails were delineated on private property without the permission of property owners. That's a big issue for me. There are two maps that I want to talk about. The second map at the end of chapter 5 delineates proposed trail locations in general manner using broken orange lines. Characteristic of these delineation on the map do not infringe on anybody's private property. There's nothing wrong with that map. Just a side note, the map does not have an identifying title. You might want to take a note of that. The third map at the end of chapter 5, it's Franklin Township Conceptual Trail Map, delineates proposed trails on private property with broken red lines. Township does not have, I believe the township does not have specific written permission to delineate a proposed trail from an impacted property owner. that this proposed trail should be removed. There are numerous locations where the township has not received permission. Too many indicate without a focused study. A specific example of a proposed trail connecting Brothers Riding neighborhood to Mount Olivet Farms neighborhood. That trail runs directly through somebody's private property, and I know that property owner really well. They would never accept a trail there. So as a minimum, that one needs to be removed. And I'll give you the property is 72-6-8.57 for the record. These proposed trails were developed without the property owner's knowledge or consent. Publishing this information on an official township document suggests that Franklin Township believes that public access could or should be possible. Now, what's wrong with that? Well, there are security issues. Publishing a proposed trail compromises the security and privacy of the property owner. A major component of security is the unknown nature of the configuration and characteristic of a piece of private property. What you cannot see, you cannot disturb or harm. Having a low profile and visibility is a fundamental tenet of security. Suggesting a potential path through private property will encourage some people to trespass for the purpose of curiosity and invites the public to potentially solicit the owners for access. Additionally, the information could create an opportunity for harm to the property owner or some other nefarious intent. Some of the key components of property security are the basic security, privacy, liability, and public knowledge of unauthorized access. Now, as a rural community, Franklin Township is attractive to many because of security and privacy offered by larger secluded land parcels. Suggesting that these parcels might be open to public access fundamentally violates the security and privacy desired by many of these property owners. Allowing the public to access private land creates the liability for the property owner from injury, damages the actual or perceived by the public using the trail, and the risk is unacceptable to most property owners. Publishing an unauthorized trail on an official document will identify the presence of a trail and that the public could access either unknowingly or with intent to harm the property owner. I can tell you, when this issue first came up last summer, I discovered a map that showed a whole series of trails around my property and all my neighbors' property here. That doesn't show up on this map right here. I don't know where it went, it just disappeared. But I made an informal study of about 50 property owners that surround me and explained this situation. And none of them, to a person, was in favor of delineating these trails on an official map. So my objection is to go over that map, and the ones you don't have permission to delineate, remove them. Just on another note, some trails were proposed on major roadways in the township. And as many people know, walking, cycling on our rural roads is high-risk activity, considering the bad driver characteristics of local drivers. It's a dangerous activity for Franklin Township to promote. Could create serious injuries and provide a liability to the township. I'd recommend you take out the recommendation for cycling on public roads. Just adding a little validity to that comment. Last spring, a cyclist recently collided with an automobile on South Bank Road, resulting in a fatality to the cyclist. So I think just encouraging that on public roads is bad policy for the township. Those are my comments.
All right, thank you, John. Any other public comments?
Yeah,
We have to go back to maps. Sorry.
What's that, Paul?
I would like to just comment on the one section you guys were talking about, 5.1 something, where the planning commission, which I'm a member of, I'm sorry, the comprehensive plan committee, which I'm a member of, we we clearly recognize that trails are of interest to the majority of township, and that seeing the townships around us make leaps and bounds ahead of us in trails and pathways. And we said, why are we not getting that done? And what we saw was we require walkways in our developments, but they're always given a variance. So I actually am having trouble thinking of any developments that have a pathway. But if you drive into the next township up like Schoolhouse Road or 841 North, there's so many developments in New London or London Grove that have pathways around them that are always busy with people, not walking outside of their own development, but just walking around their own development. So when some of your members mentioned it would be a trail to nowhere, it doesn't need to go anywhere. Just having a walkway, a safe place for children and people to walk around their development. Because as John said, we need to get them off the roads. I agree with that. Then giving them a place to walk safely in their own development is key. And then having a connector to another development would be a bonus, of course. But just having the developer install that at their cost is important. And so just giving an easement is not what we're looking for. We're looking for some way to get a trail built by the developer and make it part of the development. So when the person buys the house, they understand that there's a walkway there. And if they don't want that, then they don't buy the house. But as you can see from our neighboring developments, it's very popular. So as the comprehensive plan committee, we were saying, how can we do that? And that's why we were trying to get more strong wording to say, please require this. But everything that we've put in this document to try to encourage trails, you guys have taken down tonight one by one to reduce our language so that trails are more optional, will be less likely to be built. So that's my comment, that please keep that in mind. Our intention is to encourage trails, not to give fewer trails. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Paul. With the comments from supervisors and the public, the planning commission, do you want to visit any other aspects of chapter 5?
We have to do the maps at some point.
Right.
So we have to do the maps for 4 and 5. Do we do 5 first and then go back to 4?
That would make sense, I think.
Janina, are you able to bring up the maps that would be associated with chapter 5?
Okay, these are the ones from 4. So I'm going to scroll through these quickly. Here is the first one for chapter 5. I don't know, can't really see it all, so maybe if I make it, I don't know if this is helpful, so you can see the whole map as one. It does have this one has a name. It's called the Trail Concept Overview. And this was from the task force meetings. We were calling it a casual name of the 30,000 foot view because it's a very conceptual, almost a cartoonish version of this map. So I don't know if anyone wants to talk about this, or I'm trying to make the whole thing as visible as possible.
So this is a map without a header or title.
Well, this has Franklin Concept Overview. It's right here. That is the title. All the map titles are in this title block. They're not at the top of the map. That's how they all function. See, water resources, land resources.
So this is a concept map. What is now the procedure to turn that into an efficient, effective map?
For what purpose?
Well, you got this map. Does this mean we publish this and people start walking those routes?
No,
Exactly. So what do we have to do between what we see here to making that an effective walkway?
we should talk about that on the second map, I believe.
Okay.
You want to show us the second, and we just talk about both of them at the same time, Ginny?
This is what we were calling the dipping down a little bit further into maybe like a 10,000 foot-ish. I think that's what we were calling it. View, it's still pretty conceptual, and it does have a name, conceptual trail map. It's not the overview anymore because we're, going down a little bit further into details, but not that level of detail with, no parcels or any of.
So how much of that is private land and how much of that is public land? Is that delineated somehow? So that, we know some of that is available because it's public land, but the private land, we have to get approvals from people to allow people to.
I don't believe there's any, I don't believe there's any private land shown to have a path on it.
So these roadways are these
Those are-
walkways which are already in place?
Those are development roads.
So before we publish something like this as walkways for people to use, what process do we go through, or is there no process required?
Well, the question, I'm not sure that we're going to publish anything as a guide.
So what's the purpose of having these
A plan
dotted lands? Okay,
so that we can plan, so that we understand. So if a development comes in, then we have a map to look at to say, it would be nice if your development were to include a walkway out to such and such, because we have another pedestrian path right there, instead of working in a void. So it's so that we can plan a network.
so who has to agree to this before we go through those steps? We're talking about a concept here, but there has to be some sort of an agreement by somebody that says, all right, this is what we want to do, before we then put in some process to make this happen, right?
I'm not following.
Well, if I, let's say, go from the winery 1 to winery 2 at the top, that small stretch, is that land that's available as a pathway now, or is it, we have to do things to get that?
That's all private. Majority of those dashed red lines appeared all to be on private land.
So we would have to have some way of getting those private landowners to agree to this, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And at this point, we have not got any of that. Okay, so there's some process we have to go through. And so this should probably be kept within the planning commission and the supervisors, I guess, and not for public consumption, I would guess.
Well, our comprehensive plan is for public consumption. The question is whether or not a comprehensive plan is actually a place where somebody would go to find out where to go for a walk. And I would say, no, absolutely not. This is a plan so that we know what we're doing in the future. That's all it is. It's not intended to be a walking map. It doesn't say it's a walking map. And actually everything, the purple says proposed future trail. It doesn't indicate that there's a trail there.
When we said proposed future route of a trail. And I also, I apologize, I didn't go back and look at our previous comprehensive plans, but I don't think this is the first time that we have maps that say where proposed potential trails can be.
Your current comprehensive plan has a whole feasibility study from 2009. And the feasibility study is just focusing on, this sort of thing, on trails and connectivity.
Right.
Much more detailed with
Much
lot
more
lines.
detailed than this. This is much more generalized. It divides the township into different sections, so it can get more detailed in those sections.
And nobody trespassed in 12 years.
Well, I can't say that, but I can't go along with that.
Yeah, the question is whether they went to the comprehensive plan to trespass or they simply trespassed.
I have a question.
Right.
There's also an awful lot of online information out there, guys, that people are going to access long before they go to their comprehensive plan that shows a lot more information and not any more accurate, and we don't have any control over it. There are dozens and dozens of websites that direct people where to ride their bike, where to walk, where to hike, etc. Bird watch, etc. I mean,
I'm not arguing against it. I'm just trying to determine how do we move forward to make this a reality versus just a bunch of dots on a map.
one dot at a time. And if you don't have a dot there, then you don't know that that's something you're trying to work towards.
Okay.
Right. I mean, and it's all, we just went through the narrative to say the different steps of how we potentially can achieve some of this. Looking at this map, I don't believe the cidery and Christmas tree farm is in Franklin Township. Not that it shouldn't be on the map, but pretty sure
No,
there is.
it's shown in Elk. This is Elk Township over here.
Is a yellow line not?
That's our township line. Landenberg stores on there too, but it's not in our township.
Because it's showing the regional connections and the regional context. It's the nature of the map.
I'm not trying to keep it off. I'm just trying to keep it out of Franklin.
Hey, Dave, if I could just jump in, your confusion might be on the original version. It was in the wrong location. It has been moved.
Okay.
It is now in the correct location, but it was in the wrong location.
Thanks, Paul.
John, it's not intended to be a directory in any way. It's intended.
No,
to
I
be a
was
plan.
just looking for the way forward. I wasn't trying to be critical. I was just looking for a way forward to make it happen. That's all.
Yeah,
The
so
other
a better
question-
example might be if there was a development that occurred right, in the middle of one of these purple dotted lines, then we would know that we would want access out of both sides of that development.
No, that's fine. That's okay. I
Does that make
understand
sense?
that now. Yep. No, I'm all for trails. I just try to understand it. That's all.
Does anybody have any concerns with labeling any of the roads pedestrian friendly?
Oh,
So as a planning commission, are we good with these two maps?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
Are those the two maps for this chapter?
Yes. So we can go back to chapter 4.
You're gonna take comments from the board, or you wanna do the maps first? I mean, you wanna do comments
Like-
on,
Sorry, I kind of thought we got them all, but thank you for following the rules.
it's actually your comment, Dave. Do we have to say pedestrian friendly? I mean, who's making that determination? I mean, can we just acknowledge it's a roadway? Does someone
it's
have a
specific-
criteria that's determining it's pedestrian friendly?
It's specifically development roads that are, they're not through roads.
So there was
If you
some
follow.
thought taken to it, was what you're saying, Chuck, that someone
Yeah.
has, oh, okay.
I marked them up, they're development roads. So they're not, it's not a road that's going anywhere but to someone, to someone's home at the end of a cul-de-sac or at the end of a curve. They're all limited to development roads.
Thanks. I'm good. I don't have any other comments.
Are there any comments on the biotic resources map? Are there any comments on the conserved lands map? Are there any comments on the historic resources map? How about the land resources map? And then there's, last but not least, the water resources map for chapter 4.
What's the difference between no BFE and BFE?
Base flood elevation, it's an engineering. It's engineering versus no base flood elevation.
I had a hard time finding the darker one. It's way up in the upper right corner.
Looks like there's some in the lower left too.
Yeah, there's not much of it.
Is there a real good reason why we show both? I mean, it's 1% annual chance of flood. It's a 100-year flood, basically.
What's how FEMA defines it. That's why we show it.
We just show it that way because
What's there.
that's
Yeah, it's showing
Okay.
what's there.
a little
There's-
more official.
So yeah. Does
Hey, is
any-
that it for the maps?
That's it for the maps for chapter 4 and chapter 5, yes.
Any comments from the supervisors on the maps?
None for
Any
me.
comments? Any comments from the public on the maps that hasn't been mentioned?
Dave, John Auerbach, yeah, I do want to point out something on the map here. So if you go to the last map in chapter 5, you should just scroll up a couple of maps. That's the one right there. So I can't point to it, but when you look at this map, the blue roads are existing development roads. And the broken red or magenta lines are proposed trails. Well, the one trail that I know is very objectionable to a specific property owner is one that's down near the bottom of the map. I don't know whether you can find Brothers Riding neighborhood in Mount Olivet Farms neighborhood. But there's a dotted line connecting those two neighborhoods. And it runs right through this person's pasture, private land. They don't want it. So it's a proposed line on a map that they object to. So those are the ones I'd recommend you take off. I'll send you the exact property parcel so you know it, but there are others. And the other comment, I hear a lot of discussion about planning. We have to look ahead. Well, while you're looking ahead and delineating these things on maps, you're fundamentally hurting the security and safety of the existing property owner by delineating the map. Delineating the trail in the map, excuse me. That's the point.
All right, thanks, John. You can forward me that information if you'd like.
Yeah, well, it's the I'll give you the parcel number of the, when you see that parcel, you'll see exactly where the trail runs. It connects two neighborhoods through their pasture.
So Dave, I have to counter that. I can't, I got a comment if I could, that majority of these trails that are future are on private property. And that's how we make a plan, because when those properties come up for development, because say that couple that owns a property is heading toward retirement age, and the couple that might own some property might not want a trail, that's fine. There wouldn't ever be one put there. And nowhere in any plan does anyone propose taking land to do a trail. That would never be satisfactory to any of the committees. But say a future landowner or a future developer comes in, just as Chuck gave the example, when a developer came in to develop a 40-acre parcel, we need to have it on the map to say, we would like a trail from north to south or left to right or east to west or whatever. That's how we can make these connections. If we don't have any plan going forward, we could never make connections on any of our trails. So I agree. Current landowners may never get a trail and a certain trail may never happen. But if we don't have a plan to at least start somewhere, we're never going to get anywhere.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Yep.
Dave, I'll make a comment too. I kind of agree with Paul and with John. So I absolutely agree that if a developer is going to buy a parcel of land that's 40 acres and split it up into many pieces of property and build a development, that we should have some kind of a comment or right to either require him or her to build the trail where we would like. But if another individual wants to buy the 40 acres and keep it 40 acres for themselves, I don't think we should have the right to require that. And that's where John was getting into. If a property owner of 40 acres wants to sell to another single property owner of 40 acres, if you take that away, it gets.
Wait, Jim, you're confusing official map and this map. This is not an official map. That's a legal term in the MPC. This is just a planning tool.
No, I understand, Paul, what you're saying.
Yeah,
But
just because it's on this map, you can certainly sell to another landowner and there's no consequence.
Understood. Does this map, then I'll ask my second question. Does this map, is it available to the public? If it's in the plan, if it's in the plan?
Well, the comprehensive plan is available to anyone that wants to review the comprehensive plan.
Right.
It will be on the website, Jim.
Right.
I think, I think one of the issues that comes up is the security issue, that you're publishing maps for planning purposes. What's stopping the pro or the board or the township of having a plan that's not put on a website, right? So we have a plan, we have a stated plan that we would like to expand trails. We would like to work with future developers when open space becomes available. Why do we have to necessarily post the map of the trails on existing properties that don't exist? Couldn't we have, for planning purposes, something that is not posted on the website, that maybe a person who would like to come and see the plan, they have to march to the office and get the plan? You know, we're still make it available if people want it, but you have to go find it, and you know, you have to go ask for it. That will prevent those transients who look for hiking opportunities and comprehensive plans, right? Like that.
It would also, it would also alleviate some of the angst from current property owners that might not like a dotted line going through their property if it's just not listed on the website.
Yeah, right. That's exact. That's sort of where I was going, because I think I talked to I think John is talking about the same property owner that I spoke with recently, and you know, I assured him there is no, we're not going to take anybody's land. We're not, you know, it's not the purpose of this. They didn't cite security concerns. I'm not saying that John was wrong, but they were more interested in saying, look, I don't want to be forced into something I don't want to do. So I think there might be a compromise here. We need a planning tool. Like, we need planning tools because that's part of what we do as supervisors. But we need to also respect the landowner. So there's got to be a compromise where we say, here's the master or the high level 30,000 foot plan that has just directional arrows, you know, the one that we're looking at. And then, you know, for planning purposes, there's something more specific, but it's not something that's published widely. It's available if you're interested, but it's not published widely because we want to discourage people from, you know, blazing their own trails, so to speak.
Right. So it would be this one. So the one that's on the screen now is that the one you're recommending? Maybe we don't publish, but we go with the other one, the orange.
It's hard for me to see this, but yeah, I mean, this one is a high. Is this the? I mean, this looks like a 30,000 foot trail map, but is it not?
This is the 10,000 foot. Janine,
Yeah,
can you put the 30,000 on?
The one above it. Yeah.
This is the 30,000 foot one. This is more of the 10,000 foot one.
Yeah.
This is
I think the 30,000 foot one, and this is just, you know, we can always renegotiate when it gets to the board, but I think this is more appropriate for something that you would publish widely. And then the next one below it, where it looks like you're more specific, right? Like, here's where the trails will go, might be something that we keep for planning purposes internally and not necessarily publish widely. Right. You don't, like, the pro doesn't need to have this on the website for the pro to do their job, if that makes sense.
But Dave,
Thanks,
how do we
David. Sorry, but this was not to have a discussion back and forth.
Yeah, you're right.
But the ideas proposed by everybody, I do ask the planning commission, do you have any interest in removing the map, or recommending removing the map, or keeping these maps in the comprehensive plan after listening to supervisors and the public?
I think the 30,000 foot plan would be appropriate. I'm not sure about the 10.
I think it's imperative that we be able
not opposed to have them. I'm sorry. I think we've had similar maps in the previous comprehensive plans. I'm in favor of having both of them, but
I'm fine leaving them both in, because they're just suggestions, what ifs, if we get the opportunity. You know, they're not committing us to anything or anybody else.
I agree with Mark with both.
Matt?
I agree with Mark.
And Chuck?
I also think that both is fine.
Okay, so we'll go with that for now from the PC. Um, Any other things from the planning commission that we feel we need to cover? Janine, have we covered what we intended to tonight?
We have. And so for next meeting, it would be great if we could go on to chapter 6 and 7 and then related maps for those chapters. Preferably, it would be nice if we could get to chapter 8. But I don't know if you all think that's realistic.
I think we need to be prepared, guys, to go over chapter 8.
Okay, we'll aim for 6, 7, and 8 then.
So as far as the comprehensive plan, I truly appreciate everybody's input, supervisors, public, and the planning commission. Janine, thanks for your help. Public comment. Being none, we'll adjourn at 10:04. And thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Thanks,
Good night.
everyone.